I want to tell you about how I came upon the greatest moment of my work for social media, Web 2.0, whatever you want to say it. But I think you will really benefit from a lot of the things that I give about an audio podcast I was involved in and how it can help you. Here we go. All right, so I love technology, even though it frustrates me. I do love technology. And I grew up watching things like Tech TV, Leo Laporte, and that kind of a thing. So I was kind of primed for this stuff that was coming. I heard about these podcasts and that kind of thing. And my wife and I were watching this show called Lost. It was on ABC, and it was about these people that they were in a plane crash on an island and how they kind of survived. So it's kind of a serious Gilligan's Island sort of, and there was little bits of Survivor, the show, and it was a really thought-provoking show. And it was one of those shows where you would talk to people. They call it a water cooler show. So that you would catch people the next day or week or whatever and say, hey, did you see Lost? And what did you think about it? I mean, I was involved at work. I remember a friend of mine, she caught me and she said, what do you think about this? And I was like, this is really strange that a show like this would kind of nudge people to kind of talk about it. And so my wife and I would watch Lost and we really got hooked on it. I remember I saw I think it was 2 or 3 seasons in, and I heard about it, but I didn't really watch it. And I watched the pilot and I was like 15 minutes into it and I stopped and I go, honey, you got to watch this show. And so we started watching Lost to the point where we were so hooked and invested in it that I bought the DVDs and we went on a cruise. I took the DVDs and I bought a mobile DVD player. And so we were on a plane watching Lost, which is kind of funny, but anyway. And then we went on the cruise and we were watching Lost as well. So we really loved this show. And I loved it because Lost was a show that different people could look at the same thing and see different things. And it wasn't just one for all, it was many for many. And it was a really interesting concept. And I found that blogging and stuff was pretty popular. And there are some really interesting blogs at that time that would talk about what things mean. And also, there was a lot of really great podcasts. There was The Transmission and there was the Weekly Lost podcast. And these folks would talk about things. And I said, man, this is really, really interesting because they're digging into it like I've never seen. And so I said, man, I wonder if there's other thing, because I knew Lost was like already kind of established, and I said I don't want to get involved in that. Then I remember a friend of mine, I was thinking about this today, posted on Facebook. He said ABC's Once Upon a Time is backed or part of two of the writers and producers of Lost. And I went, Once Upon a Time, what's that? And so when you look into it, it's kind of like a twisted fairy tale show with just things kind of mixed up and mashed up. And it's Disney, but it's not Disney. So it's Disney-ish. And so I said, man, that's really interesting. So it premiered and I started watching. And Colleen and I were watching. And after each episode, we'd sit for 30, 45 minutes and we talk about it. And I said, that's interesting because it's the same as Lost. And so I posted a blog post about one of the episodes, and I just really sort of did a deep dive what these things mean, what it meant to me, and that kind of a thing. And the blog post took off. And I said, well, I wonder. And so we gave it 5 episodes because, we didn't want to watch stuff forever if it wasn't really going to be any good. And so that's what I recommend. If you find a show that you feel the same way, then give it 5 episodes. Then I remember I sat down with Colleen and I asked the big question. I said, will you, rain or shine, good times and bad times, be my co-host for this Once Upon a Time podcast? And she said she'd do it. Now, I would not have moved forward, even though I'm doing a video podcast by myself these days. But with Lost, I knew I needed a co-host. Now, I'm a movie guy. I'm a Star Wars fan. I'm a Joseph Campbell fan. I love TV tropes and movie tropes, so that's where I come from. Colleen is more well-read. She's a Disney fan. She knows all kinds of different things about Disney movies and cartoon animated features and all that. But she is well-read. She knows Shakespeare. She knows that kind of thing. And so when I really started thinking about it, I said, this is going to work. So we started the podcast, and I wanted to figure out what kind of a name it should be. And because I knew that copyright and all that was important. And so I said, well, shall I call it Frozen in Time? Because that was part of the thing, is this town was frozen in time by this evil queen. And so I said, I wonder that and this and that. And I remember Cliff Ravenscraft would do these podcasts, and it was the Sarah Chronicles fan podcast, the da-da-da fan podcast, the whatever name of the show fan podcast. And I go, I'm going to take that idea. That's a great idea. So we decided ultimately on the Once Upon a Time fan podcast, because I figured if Once Upon a Time was first, it would come at the top of the search bar when you're looking for Once Upon a Time. I thought that was a pretty good idea. And I think overall it really worked out well. And so we had a slow start, but we started. And it was really interesting because we started on, I think we recorded on Wednesday, I edited through, and I posted it like I think it was Saturday. And so we had a slow start, but at least it started to catch on, and people really start to, I really can't go into all the emails that we got from people. There were people on buses. There was a pilot who listened while he flew a plane. There were people that just were all over the place, listening at work, listening at school, while they did homework. It was really amazing to see that. So we did the main show, and then later on, I took another cue from Cliff Ravenscraft's The Weekly Lost podcast. He would do, I think he called it the initial reactions or something like that, right after the episode aired. And I said, man, that's a great idea. And so I started what I called First Thoughts. And it was, just right after the episode. And I was in California, so it was like later. And so I tried to stay up, and Colleen and I would kind of give a rapid fire what we thought of the episode and what the connections were and that kind of a thing. And so we kept moving forward, and then things just really started to take off. The downloads were up, and we had people that really started to send in emails. please, and they were, very interesting thoughts and all this kind of thing. And I said, this is really happening. And, I told you about the other people that were listening in different places, but then people really wanted to get involved. And I said, this is a lot of work. And so if I could get people and we had a couple of really loyal listeners that became the deputies, because one of the characters was the sheriff of Storybrooke. And so they became the deputies. They did a great job. They put in different things and got involved and helped out with blog posts. And it was really, really great. And so we started just it was like a snowball. It just kept going and going and going. At that point, we were the only Once Upon a Time podcast. We were it. We were number one because we were the only one. But that didn't last forever. Other things were coming. And we'll talk about that next time. See you. Bye.